Everybody's
Like everybody's what?
gone home behind you.
I am so far from Boston, actually. It's a very clever green screen.
I like it.
All right, thanks everyone for your patience. Okay, so I pressed the record button. I hope everybody got an obnoxious notification that this meeting's being recorded. So just for the record, this is the BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting. It is January 16th, 2024. The BPDA is continuing to host public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. We are recording the meeting. The open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Please be aware that an audio record of this meeting is being made by the Commission staff. If you do not wish to be recorded, please mute yourself and turn off your camera. We will follow the standard design committee subcommittee format, beginning with a presentation from each proponent team, followed by a working session with the commissioners. Once that's concluded, members of the public will be invited to ask questions or comment. Please use the Zoom hand-raising function at the bottom of your screen and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Present for this meeting, we have Commissioners Eastley, Evans, Manfredi, Ron, and Solano. And the agenda for this meeting will be first presentation from 475 through 511 Dorchester Avenue, also known as Core on the Dot. This project has two sort of sessions as part of this agenda. The first session will be phase 1, focused on open space. We have presenters Mark Rosenstein, BK Boley, Lewis Kraft, Rob Adams. I believe I've promoted all of you guys to co-host. So you should be able to share your screen when you're ready. I'm going to set a timer. We'll have a 10 to 15 minute presentation by the proponent, followed by 30 minutes of discussion from the commissioners. I'll let you guys know when we are approaching time, and then we'll be switching over to the 505 presentation, focused on just that building. So with that, Mark and team, please take it away.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure you did say Lewis was promoted, so he'll be able to. Okay, good. Thank you, commissioners. Good to see you again. Very quickly, because I want to give as much time to the design team as possible. You will recall on the dot, we started with our 21 acres. Then we moved to phase 1 of the 9 acres. We met recently for a few weeks to talk about phase 1A, which was the 495 residential building only, which we appreciate your help moving that forward. And as we mentioned in that project, we would focus next on the open space, which is both immediately adjacent to 495 and sort of the centerpiece of the overall 9 acres. So we're going to do that first tonight. Then as part of the dialogue with the BPDA, we felt like 505, which is the other building that fronts on Dot Ave. So sort of 495 and 505 go together as Dot Ave buildings. And then we'll have another session with you in the future for 65 and 75, which are the 2 commercial buildings that are further from Dot Ave and really the longer view. So that's sort of the structure of the process. I'm going to turn it over to Rob Adams and let him walk you through the open space. The one comment I have is obviously there is an interaction between open space and the ground floor of 505. So I think you'll see we'll get more into the details of how 505 interacts with open space in the 505 session in a few minutes. This is really the big picture open space down the middle. Rob, take it away.
Great, thanks. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Let me just make sure it's advancing. Okay, so just a recap of what we've been hearing over the course of what Mark said the last couple of months, primarily from BCDC, but also input from BPDA. It's been a really good process. So, and we'll touch on these points tonight, right? One, think about how the experience within the landscape can differ from East to West Park, and I'll say within the park themselves. Provide more clarity and information on the edges, their relationship to the building, consider topographic variation to help enhance the sense of discovery within the open space, and how is this place unique and authentic to the Dorchester Avenue neighborhood. And then lastly, BPA, Jill and others have really kind of pushed us to be very clear about the definition between public and private space and how those areas can be delineated for utmost clarity. So we're going to walk through, as Mark said, right? This is the 9 acres of the much larger 22 acre master plan. And while there are open spaces coming down the line, this puts a lot of pressure, a lot of weight and importance on these 2 open spaces that'll be delivered first. And so we thought it would be important to, I'll say, clarify aspirations around extent or reach of these open spaces. Clearly, they want to be neighborhood in their scale and their focus, but also have a component that reaches out to the larger civic neighborhood, movie night, food truck festivals, open markets, whatever it might be. Clearly, this isn't the scale of Millennium Park, but it's something a little bit more than a neighborhood park. And then looking back about the history of the space, well, clearly there's been change in Boston Harbor over time. I think it's important to note this was once an intertidal zone, right? A salt marsh. And so it changed daily, hourly, and it was this kind of living organism. Fast forward to the site that's here today, it's clearly not changing daily or hourly. It's a pretty static, urban built environment. And I think one of the things that's really resonated through the process of reaching out to the community, I think one of the comments that was made at one of the public meetings was, just let us see the fall change, right? Let us have some foliage that depicts the seasonality of New England's fall. We don't get that. All these trees that you see around the site are probably invasives and mainly on private property. And so we saw this open space as a real opportunity to, as all parks do, but try to enhance this notion of seasonality, of sanctuary, of change and growth and texture, right? Not that we are AE by on the bottom right by any stretch, but how can landforms start to talk about snow and accumulation of snow, drifting, the ability to touch and feel and be more present with some of the vegetation within the landscape. And so what are some of the little tricks that we can do to help kind of enhance or bring these ideas forward? Another comment I think that helped us frame the experience was one that Laura mentioned, was these 2 parks will, by their kind of proximity and their existence, feel connected, right? They're both landscapes, they're both connected to each other, but how will the user experience them differently? And so our objective to date has been eastern open space along Dot Ave, feels a little bit more broad brushed. It's communal, it's a big open void in many ways. Whereas the western open space feels more intimate and pairs and groupings, a variety of nodes. And so the scale is much smaller. And we started to sketch that out, started to think about kind of circulation, which we'll talk about later. But I think one of the important things we touched on in our early ideas was this notion of materiality. And how can the materiality in one park maybe be used differently in the other park? And how can the user experience those things differently? And with sanctuary also comes this idea of circulation and portals and kind of penetrations, if you will, into the open space. And so while we didn't want to create hard defined edges, we also recognized that the idea of passing into a space was also part of a sanctuary. And so in the east open space and along the back, the west open space, there's definitely edges in which there's primary entrances. I think also an important part of this is providing corridors along the buildings to create that civic edge, if you will, to help define public and private spaces. And then ultimately looking at a circulation corridor and really a flow movement that made kind of the circular kind of fluidity movement between the spaces, holding some edge on the back. You'll see all this in some of the renderings we talk about later. Quickly touching on some of the resiliency, we have a finished floor elevation that's higher than Dorchester Avenue, and we'll talk about that in the next section. But we quickly get to a point where we're flush condition within east and 100% within west open space. And while the uses within the open space will be open to the public, we also located them in places where there was a symbiotic kind of relationship to some of the ground floor uses of the building. And so that there was an energy created by the gathering on the private space that could spill out onto the, not literally, but kind of metaphorically spill out onto the open space as well. Oops, I just went all the way up, sorry. Also the program, some of the program location we talked about, the city really pushed us on this to think about how the solar orientation would kind of work within the open space. And so we did a quick study looking at where the different sun angles are, and we provided those kind of gathering spaces at different times of the day associated with the sun location. And what's really nice about the space is that at the end of the day, the western sunlight essentially just floods down both the open spaces. And so that helped us locate some of the programming, which you'll see later. Also, the fact that 495 in the foreground is residential, putting some of those more residentially focused program, play space, picnic pavilions, etc., adjacent to the 495 building. And then lastly, thinking about water management in a creative way. And so you'll see that reflected in the design and the renderings above or following. But the idea that we're going to sheet all of the hard surface areas into drainage, into infiltration locations, even though we're on deck in West Garage, providing an opportunity for detention within those plant beds as well. And then all of the streetscapes cascading into infiltration locations. Important to note that Core has been doing a lot of really good work on their kind of on the lot location, which is just east of this or just north of this site. And it speaks to, I think, Core's commitment to one program, but also to make this place authentic by bringing the community in as much as possible, listening to community requests for programming and events. And so fully anticipate that these open spaces will also be a reflection of that programming that Core has provided. So around the specific program of the parks, we've really looked at and communicated and had a lot of outreach with the community. Some key program elements have risen to the top: a small play space, a small interactive water feature, a place for a few food trucks to pull up during the day. Again, a real focus on kind of smaller gathering garden rooms, if you will. And then, as BK likes to say, the idea of having a big green gathering space, a big civic lawn in which the community can come together, and then some smaller picnic pavilions as well. And so in thinking about the scale of the space, just quickly looking at Seaport Common is similar in scale to East Park. The lawn of North End Parks are similar in scale to the West Park. While these aren't huge, they are relatively important in their mass and their size, and so can support a variety of program elements within the space. So we're gonna, I think, just take a quick glimpse through the open spaces, starting at the East Park, moving to the West Park, but you get a general sense of the open spaces in this overhead shot with the kind of corridors, civic corridors to the left and the right of the open space, the big open void of the civic lawn in East Park with the program surrounding it. West Park becomes a little bit more room-based, small rooms to the left and the right, a central garden room, and then a smaller seating area, lawn with the pergola in the background. And so we'll talk about this in more detail in the next session, but 505 and others having ground floor retail almost completely surrounding the park to provide some of that energy and vibrancy as well. And so thinking about the programming and the layout of the programming within East Park, as noted in those earlier diagrams around sun and solar orientation, some small picnic pavilions on the northeast corner of the space. You can see the cafe, the quote unquote private zones, clearly identified with each building. That stage and deck and gathering space that we talked about in 495, a small play area to the northwest, interactive water feature, the big civic lawn, a small event plaza for food trucks, and then a drainage, essentially kind of an artful drainage channel, if you will, an infiltration channel around the entire civic lawn. And then the Western Park, similar, you can see the cafe zones clearly delineated. And here you can see kind of more subdivision of the space, a central seating area, the larger seating lawn in the background, and then kind of the garden edge holding that western corner, southwestern corner. And then these two arbor rooms that help, as we talked about, connect to some of the energy of the cafe zones. So starting at the east, yes.
Sorry, that's 10 minutes.
Okay, we're 5 more minutes and we're done. So starting at the east space, right, its idea of being more communal, being more open, simplistic in its form, the idea of a big oval lined with Armstrong maples or some bright fall color, and really looking at this idea of seasonality within the underplantings interactive water feature that we talked about. So starting at Dorchester Avenue, looking into the central lawn, kind of a threshold, if you will, feeling like you're entering into a space, materiality that you'll see used later on with the split granite blocks. but also having some smaller subspaces to the left and right in these secondary paths within the open space. Small picnic pavilion on the right facing 495, providing some shade from the southern sun, some smaller seating areas. The big oval walk and the oval lawn, and you can see the rain channels just on the inside on the left side, all of that surface water sheeting off with weirs periodically helping to channel the water down into a central infiltration location. And then pleasantly enough scale to get some of these small program uses, interactive play space with ample seating to either side, vegetation and plant material for shade, small interactive water element there in the foreground, and then just some of the material that we're thinking about for the play space, really simple 2 to 5 year old focused, natural and storytelling in its character. And then looking at the Ellery Street as it bisects or connects the two parks, eliminating the on-street parking to really reduce the amount of paving to connect the parks. And then West Park becomes, again, as we talked about, more intimate in scale, a series of smaller rooms, thinking about its materiality different and its forms different, like the garden room, the lawn area becomes kind of concave and inward focusing with some topography to help frame that space. Those garden rooms in the upper left with an overhead tree canopy. Sorry, slightly out of order. And so the garden room, thinking about closer to Ellery Street, that central seating area with boardwalks and slightly depressed to help capture rainwater. And then the arbor rooms, as you can see, with movable furniture and chairs that help connect, I'll say, the ground floor uses of the building. Looking back towards Dorchester Avenue, the idea of commissioning a local artist. It won't be this pile of rocks, but the idea that there's some art piece that has some enticement, as you can see. And even though there's a bosque of trees, there's clear sight lines from east to West Park. And then you can see that area, the cafe area, clearly delineated there on the left side, which would be typical for all the cafe zones. And then, sorry, looking back towards that seating lawn, using again those salvaged granite blocks to help create a seating area, small performance area, amphitheater, if you will, but a much smaller scale. And then lastly, that western edge looking back into the space, having some overhead structure, shade structures to help hold that edge to the west to the train tracks, and then using the topography of that berm you saw on the land to help create a sense of kind of adventure and encouragement of moving around that space to have the larger western park unfold in front of you. So that's more or less where we are as of today. I think we've made some good progress since we've all last talked. I'll get back to the overhead and happy to take any comments or questions.
And I'll just throw in one sort of quick note that I think everybody knows, but just to say it, East and West Park are placeholders. Those
Yeah,
are not the
thank you.
names. We will eventually have a community process and call them something much more fun than the East and West.
Right.
Great, thanks for the brevity of the presentation. Commissioners, the floor is yours for discussion.
Rob, thanks for such a great presentation.
Yep.
And I know that you're going to be renaming East and West Park, but actually, as I look at this, I think about it as a continuous ribbon. I'm really appreciating how much you've thought about the interstitial space within the right-of-way of Ellery, and thinking about as you're standing at East and looking to the west or vice versa, that it reads as one space. And I think you mentioned at the beginning that, you know, using some of the elements in both locations helps to really tie that together. So my vote is that it really be called kind of one park. I think it very much is an incredibly effective ribbon. My question, and some of the diagrams got to this, is really about what happens on the edge, on the building edges. And I, you know, understand that in some cases, like 495, that edge is quite activated and hopefully activated for the users there. But I'm not as clear about the edges along the other parts of this park. And I wondered if you could, maybe using this one or even using the site plan, which I think is one before or one after this,
Yep.
just help us to understand, what do you experience as the building hits the ground?
Linda,
Yeah.
let me give you a little bit of an overview of the programming from here, because I think that's what you're asking. So as you mentioned, 495, right? We've got the senior program, we have the, right, I think you guys are familiar with, and we think that's pretty activated. 505, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, this particular conversation about interaction and activity. The blue area you see, our goal is a grocer, right? That's why there's one big retail area on the ground floor of 505. And you'll see in the next, we're trying to get the entrance to that on the northeast corner because it wants to be very proximate to the neighborhood across the street who desperately need that grocer. We'll talk about that. But in terms of activity and activation, that side, the southern edge of East open space, hopefully is bound by a grocer, which provides a certain level of activity, provides a destination for the community and abutters to want to walk through and get there. On the other side of Ellery Street, 65, there's retail fronting the entirety of the face of the open space, and we carved that into 2 to 4 retailers. We don't have the answer to exactly how many. We've tried to divide that so there's multiple options for doors and entrances, bigger and smaller. On 75, there's an anchor on the corner, which we think is a great spot for food and beverage, sort of anchoring the corner. We've got cafe seating that Rob talked about right adjacent to it. And then candidly, to the west of that is our big bicycle parking area, which we think is good because it brings you down Service Road on the bike parking and into that. And again, sort of brings people to the western edge of the space and then allows them to sort of walk across to the entrances to the commercial buildings and whatnot. So that's what's really the perimeter of the open space is fundamentally retail with 2 significant goals. One is a grocer and then one is a food and beverage that we think will really help to drive folks into the spaces from the neighborhood side. And then obviously, last piece, I will say that parking is centralized under 65 and 75. So if you're a office user in 505, you need to go through the park to get to the parking garage. So we also think there's some cross traffic there in terms of just getting to and from the Dorchester buildings to the parking garage that's underneath the Ellery buildings. So overview quickly, but that's sort of what's happening on the ground plane.
And I
Yeah,
think,
that's helpful.
Linda, our objective was at least in the westernmost space of the combined remnant of open space, that there be these 2, we've called them arbor rooms for lack of better words, but essentially a place for movable tables and chairs to exist that feels, I'm going to say, symbiotic to the ground floor cafe seating that will be adjacent and under the undercuts of 65 and 75. It won't be a pay to play experience. You can sit there with your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but restaurants attract restaurants, and the idea that there be these similar uses on either side seemed like a nice solution and helped create a different character than the easternmost park. At 505, there's a small seating area kind of carved out of the corner, the northwest corner of that building. And then again, sympathetically, a small kind of very small event plaza, but a place with some overhead catenary lights. Food trucks could pull up, 1 or 2 food trucks could pull up there. Again, having that relationship to what might be some ground floor food and beverage that spills out of the grocery store. And then, as Mark said, that major entrance to the grocer on Dot Ave.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I mean, I think, my question is really about this interstitial zone. So what's unique about this project is that we're creating this public-private urban apron around these buildings, even though we don't have a street out here. And so I think that at least I'm persuaded that this area, that this interstitial zone that's between the walkway and the face of the building is really important and needs to be activated as much as it can be. And then I think, all of the other uses that happen to the internal part of the park feel really good. So I would just encourage you as you continue to work to be thinking about what that looks like. Do you have awnings? Do you have the outdoor seating and tables, which I know you shared in at least one of the diagrams? How does that area feel really active. And then I think to Mark, your point, having a grocer here, I mean, I think the idea of having a grocery is fantastic. What often happens along the sides of a grocer is that those, windows get glazed with some semi-transparent, semi-opaque material. And again, how do we think about that, and how do we activate particularly this zone that's between the main walkway and the edge of the building?
Yeah, I think we can come back. We'll see in 505, Linda, some of those views, but I think that's clearly something worth continuing to explore.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'll go.
Go for it, Laura.
Wow, you've done a terrific job of breaking down the spaces and yet making them feel like they're contiguous. And I appreciate that there are a number of those garden rooms that aren't too small and still feel connected. I have a couple of questions, though.
Yeah.
I see you have contours going down here.
Yep.
Rob,
Yep.
is this higher, or is it the natural change in grade between this and this? Because I know that there's that building up of the building, right? So
Yeah.
are you raising that above that, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think our intent
I see.
was to give, as you know, Laura, like a flat lawn tends to feel, concave and kind of diminutive. And so our idea was, yes, the park is naturally sloping up from 17, 18 to 20-ish at Ellery Street.
Yep.
And the idea that our lawn would slope up ever so slightly more than that. So if you're standing, at this entryway, the lawn kind of is, is more present and more obvious to you. It also makes a nice, what I'll say, transition or kind of edge detail here for the interactive water feature of, again, more of those granite blocks, creating a small gathering area. And so while, yes, the lawn is tilted slightly, but no more than, 2.5% to 3%, slightly more than the path around it.
So I'm sorry, Rob, is this high or is this high?
Sorry.
East or west is high?
West is high. This is, if we're according to adjacent sidewalk, the oval sidewalk.
Yeah, okay.
+2, and this would be 0.
Got it. I might think about completely reversing that. And that's so that this can have a little bit more grade to it. 2 to 3% lawn is still pretty flat. And if you took advantage of the fact that you were going that way, and you could be flush in that end and kind of pumped up on this end, not too high, right? Still allow views through, but even 3 feet from this grade would do what this does at this end, which is this really nice kind of definition that you can read from the street. So you might look at kind of flipping how that grade works.
Yeah, we can definitely study that.
Yeah, and you're going to truth some of the sizes, like the play area feels a little small, but I think the location feels right. There's a lot more to do. It's always tricky. We call this design, but it's just a step in design. But it's been, this is a really great space, and I can see that it will feel really active on all sides. Let me erase myself. The only thing I wonder about, and you have this diagram that does this, right?
Yeah.
Kind of figure 8, right?
Yeah.
Which is really nice, but I'm kind of wondering what your thinking is about this lawn. And sort of as a diagram, I expected this to be kind of like an eddy, if you will, for people.
Hmm.
so that you still keep the main spine that
Mhm.
goes around and kind of organizes the
Mhm.
whole space. But I wonder, is there even just a different kind of ecology that could be explored in there that allows people to get through it, so that
Mhm.
in some areas, like you're going you're going internal, but looking out, you're really exposed.
Yeah.
But the way that you've done the grading here, which is really great, it's really clever, is there a chance for there to be something here that might be a completely different ecology and still leave room
Yeah.
for some of the things? And and having this mound on the, oh gosh, having the mound on this side is really great too, because it helps to hide what is essentially kind of a crappy edge to the site.
Yeah.
So that this really becomes the end and edge of it. And yet when you get behind this space, you've kind of used the topography in two ways. One is to kind of end the space, and the other is to kind of embrace the space by, having something that kind of clips your view for a couple of steps.
Yeah.
So I think it's really terrific. I think you've done a great job of thinking about all of the things, and they do feel like different spaces. I think that you could, which is what I've been advocating for, but I do think that you could push that a little bit more and decide whether or not you need two big lawns
Yep.
on the site.
Yeah, I think that eddy concept is an interesting idea where people feel like they're allowed to spill off of that path and find kind of a secondary ecology, as you mentioned. I think we'll continue to look at that. Thank you.
Well, I don't
Thank
know
you.
if it was intended, Laura. I'll take the crappy edge thing as a challenge to try and make it a little bit better.
Yes, please do. Please
Yeah.
do. That wasn't here.
That wasn't a compliment. I got
Not
it.
our
That's
edge,
not-
the train tracks is
Yeah.
an edge.
Yeah.
I see Commissioner Ron has his hand raised. I just want to remind commissioners, we have about 10 more minutes of conversation, and then we're going to hear from this team again on the 505 building.
So earlier in your by the way, it's a very nice presentation, both to Mark and Rob. The images were quite alluring, and if you can hold on to the qualities, I think it would be great. You mentioned the issue of what does the building edge, how does the building edge on? And those building edges, I'll take 75 Ellery as an example, or 505, along the park. Those is that about 20 stories high, Mark? You're
Sorry, muted. 13, but there is a step back there, Bill. But yes, it's not an insignificant vertical condition. Yes.
And I'm wondering, did you ever consider, because you've got such nice parks, to also deal with edges to the building, whether they are senses of porches or wood trellises or something that really starts relating the park to the vertical form of the building?
That's an interesting question. I will say this, Bill. I think that 65, and again, we're going to come to you next, I would say 2 weeks from now, with 65 and 75 as architecture, and I think you'll have a better sense of it. I'll leave it to BK to make the argument. I think you can see there's some overhang and some other things we're trying to accomplish at 65 to really tie those together. 75, I would agree, is much more of a building with a particular look to it and not as thoughtful there. So I think it's a fair question, the edges of 65 and 75 for those meetings. Let us think about that comment and make sure we're addressing it when we come back, because we have certainly wrestled with the relationship between the volumes of the buildings and the open space immediately next to it.
Because I think there's so much to be said for the green space, but if it is up against a very harsh wall edge, you've kind of lost what was possible here.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair. Let us look at it, and when we come to you with 65 and 75, let us reflect that.
Yeah, I think we're much more successful on 65 than we are on 75, particularly in those views, because we've kind of raised things up on 65. We have a step back, a terrace. And on 75, it is a one, even though it's a tall one-story, it is a one-story kind of reveal at the base. So I think we should take another look at that.
Commissioner Evans?
Thank you. Great presentation. I guess I'm excited by the sort of dynamism of this form, and maybe one of the questions that I'm struggling with is to what extent, and maybe this is a little bit on what Bill was saying, is does the sort of geometry of this, the sort of formal weight of this, start to impact what's happening on other buildings or even on .av itself? Because I guess what I'm seeing, I appreciate programmatically what you're doing between where, let's call it the sort of figure 8 infinity symbol, kind of again sort of unlock spaces for programming, but the geometry of those feel like it's just kind of filling in the void between this figure 8 and then these very four distinct geometries. And I say that at the same time not wanting to say that the whole thing needs to speak the same formal language, because that'll be a little bit too relentless and monolithic for what wants to be a diverse urban experience. But I do maybe just want to throw out there to what extent, you know, does the formal strength of this start to push into some of the other things? Like, for example, for 495, we talked a lot about that sort of little nestled in stage there at that courtyard. And like, that's just kind of hitting that side of that oval now. I mean, is there any way that that can resolve itself in a way where they feel like it was a more intentional relationship or a meaningful relationship between those two things? So same idea, kind of copy that comment to all four buildings. And then I guess I don't believe I've seen any in this presentation perspectives from .av, but I guess, again, the scale of this is so amazing and ambitious in terms of the impact it can have on this community, but how does this plug in? How do you know if I'm walking out of Andrews, can you see this? I don't think you can. And so, you know, I think, again, for example, I see how you've got that, let me try to annotate here. I'm looking at kind of like this area here. Again, I appreciate the like need for that bump out to have a certain geometric shape to it, but are there other cues or things we can do to have this form, perhaps the sort of oval form kind of, again, come out past its sort of boundary and kind of be able to influence .av? And basically, again, what is the relationship of this significant open space to .av, to the larger context?
Yeah, we'll show you, you will see some views in the 505
Yeah,
presentation
I
in a
stuck
few
into that
minutes,
when I
right?
saw
So you'll
that,
see
yeah.
some of that, but I think you asked an interesting question, and I will say we sort of, so there's a 20-foot ROW that runs parallel to Dorchester Avenue on our side that is essentially a future transportation corridor, right? BTD
Okay.
and BCD's, excuse me, BPDA staff wanted to make sure that there was expandability to .av for future need. And so I just want to, I think your comment is a good one. I just want you to be aware that we're somewhat limited in terms of how much that part can grow out to the .av edge by that ROW. Doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah,
I just want you to be aware that there are some PIC and other things we run into. But I do get your point about if you were leaving the station and you just turn north, do you get a view of the park? Do you know it's there, or is it just sort of a gap between two buildings? That's a really good question to ask.
Yeah, I think I hear you, Jonathan, on the, well, say formality of the circle, and I think that hopefully reads stronger in plan than what it does in ground plane experience. I think what we're, and maybe Linda or Laura touched on it, is the simplicity of, you know, the larger outdoor room, and then the relationship and the opportunity that these kind of small bento box, if you will, kind of program elements can start relating to the buildings and their ground floor uses seems really nice. But I agree, I hear you. If there's a way in which maybe there's some inflection in which there is a curve form that helps, you know, be different than the vocabulary of .av that starts to announce the park a little bit earlier. I think we'll continue to explore that with the city. I think that's a really interesting point.
And I will say, and I know Christina, we got to right? We're going to shift, but I want folks to know, I know you know this, we're going to be back on 65 and 75 in a couple of weeks. So I would let the commissioners know, we'll try and adopt some of this. While it won't be an open space meeting, we'll try and make sure that we're reflecting some of those comments today. Open space will be a theme that runs through all of our sessions, I think, because it's so important to how these buildings interact with the ground plane. So throw that out there, and Christina, we can move on at your leisure.
It is my leisure.
That's what I think.
It's almost exactly 5:45. We're right on time. So please proceed with your presentation for 5:05.
Perfect. Louis, if I can ask you to switch us over. Great.
And here we are. BK is going to lead us off, and then I'll continue along with Rob with this presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, particularly for all those great comments. So we are going to be looking at the edges of the buildings in this presentation, a little bit more detail. But Linda, what you mentioned about those kind of urban zones, it's hard for me to look at the same images in the same way, particularly at the entrance to our entire site from Andrews Station, where it does, I think, require some better hinting of things. So we're going to just go quickly through the planning context, our conceptual design approach for the massing, architectural languages, some detail for the skins that we're thinking about for 505. And then Louis and Rob are going to take us back into eye-level perspectives, walking around 505. We did want to really take a hard look at our retail language along Dot Avenue after the 495 meeting that you had a couple of weeks ago. There were some very, very interesting things said there about not having too much distance between the retail frontage and the street, not trying to create a deep arcade. We've actually adjusted and changed the corners of 505 to kind of pull them back at the edges and then bring the retail frontage forward. We've been working with Elizabeth and Seth on the language of the retail frontage and a hierarchy of balconies and so on and other things. So here's our phase one site. 505 is obviously on the left-hand corner, and you can see how close it is to Andrew. This is one of the two buildings that are grounded in the historic shoreline. So the conceptual emphasis has been on brick masonry structures and some of the bigger gestures of the taller structures that used to exist in the shoreline. You can go to the next image. And here are those influences, both masts, sails, as well as the gantry cranes for the higher elements of the tower, and then something that is more stabilizing brick masonry along the base and the podium of our building, which we think will calm down the effect of all the smaller buildings that are across the street in so many different languages. This shows you 505 in the context of 495. And as we mentioned to Seth, there are a few different languages going on here, and I did say that Bill Ron would be counting the number of architectural languages in the first 5 seconds of this presentation. So I do want to say that we do have a different podium language that is wrapping around the building. That's that masonry language. Then we have a tower language that is rising up with the same materials in terms of coloration of metal and so on. And then we have these big kind of angular gestures at the two ends of the building that you could see from greater distances. That gridded industrial language that is rising up at the corner was a language that we worked out in concert with Congressman Lynch, primarily because he did not like the idea of that one vertical language going all the way around the end of the building. He thought from eye-level views that it should really be multiple languages. And so that was one of the adjustments that we made. This again shows how we put the service for the building on the street A on the side building so that we can have retail wrapping around. We have a blow up of this next. This shows a blow up of our retail and ground floor approach. As you can see, we have a lobby that is really a main lobby off of Ellery Street, but a partial through lobby off of Dorchester Avenue. We have retail loading on the left-hand side in that one bay. Then the lab building loading are those next 4 bays beyond that. And then it's really the back of house stuff, fire pump room and switchgear all the way until you get to the retail corner. Then you're wrapping around to the bike room, which we want to have be very visible. You can see all the purple arrows, if you go back just for a second, Louis, that show the potential retail entrances. Originally, we were thinking of this as being some restaurants along Ellery Street, some shops along Dorchester Avenue. But the neighborhood, as you've heard, is in dire need of some kind of grocery because Bell's has been taken out of commission. It will hopefully be coming back. But we would love to have at least 25,000 square feet, which is what we're shooting for, to try to get a Trader Joe's or someone like that in here. This is the next level up, where we have our transformers on the second floor, over the loading dock and the switch gear, and then fairly large footprints beyond that. And then you keep going up. We've stepped back the podiums, the minimum of 30 feet that is required plus some, and we pushed the building back farther from Dorchester Avenue than was required in Plan Dot Avenue. We've continued that step back of the podium to the tower on Street A because there are residential buildings on that side. And then we've let the language of the building come down to grade on the park side and really just above the loading dock area. This shows some of those dimensions of those step backs above the podium area. Then this shows some of the massing approaches, looking at it from the southeast, upper left-hand corner. Then from Ellery in the lower left-hand corner, and the way some of the massing steps back and goes up across the building. And then the massing on the park side that you can see here. And then right there, you can look at the language as it's rising up from the park. Next, we'll show you some other renderings from other views. So this is from Ellery Street. One of the comments that we got was making sure we have a better hierarchy of the language of the vertical pieces, that gantry crane. Right now, this is a little bit yin-yang, I would say, if I had to make up a word, where the positive form is almost the same as the negative form. And we're thinking about shifting that line a little bit more to the right in future, in future kind of iterations. But we are trying to get some active retail around that corner of the building, dropping into Ellery Street. Next. This shows at the opposite corner of Ellery and Street A. We do have a small retailer at that bottom corner. We have our podium that steps up. We have our lobby entrance to the left of that right there. And then the podium steps up another 2 floors in that language of that double bay structure.
BK, while you're on this image, can you just bring us through what's coplanar? I'm just trying to figure out how, when the building hits the street, are we?
So we have some more viewpoints below this, but those step backs above that podium language, which is that vertical 2-story bay language out of masonry, those step backs are much, much larger above that podium. So they're 30 feet on the right-hand side, I think 20 feet on the left-hand side.
But when it hits grade, what's happening there?
When it hits grade, we have eye level views that go all the way along that edge to show you. It's about 3 feet back.
Okay.
Or 3.5 feet back, so we can have cafe tables and chairs there on this side.
Great, because I see the columns hitting the ground, but it's hard to tell what kind of reveal is there.
And BK, while you're on that, what is across the street of Building A from this building?
So there are 3- and 4-story residential buildings right now that Core has been fixing up. They weren't abandoned buildings, but they were somewhat dilapidated. Core's been fixing those up, and then Plan Dot Avenue calls for a 300-foot building across the street in between Andrew Station and our 505 building. But because of this condition, Bill, we did want to have the step backs of the tower be farther back on the sides of it.
But the master plan calls for 300 feet on this site.
Yes, and so I think we have a diagram that shows that too.
Okay, thank you.
Then this is some of the detail of the masonry podium that wraps around the building. We did want to have laid up masonry. We wanted to have it on some nice level of detail. The glass is set back about 1 foot from the face of the building. Then we have a kind of champagne metal color in these 2-story bay readings, which we hope to be, highly articulated, that brings down the scale at the street level. Then you could see as we rise up in the tower language, it's kind of a sawtooth metal with some vertical fins that stick out from that in a very, we think is an elegant kind of a rhythm that's running across the face of the building. And then you can see some of the images on the right-hand side showing the roof decks and the green roofs. With that, I think we'll just try to go through this relatively quickly. We wanted to focus on Dot Avenue and then bring you all the way around the building at the eye level. So Lewis and Rob are going to take over from there.
Thanks. With the remaining 6 or 7 minutes, we're going to then, focus in a little further. So you've seen this diagram before that speaks to the scale and character of Dot Ave. We've kind of ghosted out for here a little bit. The planned Dot Ave 300-foot podium building that would be planned directly for the south. But really, at its current state, we wanted to show a little bit here. This is an aerial of the character of Dot Ave across the street. It is a mix of buildings and forms, but what was really kind of important to pick up on is there is a fairly consistent rhythm and vertical character that we wanted to pick up on as we were thinking about the architecture of 505. Showing that now, pulling down to grade, looking at Dot Ave, looking north, the before and after. So really picking up that language and that rhythm was important while having an architectural rhythm at 505 that tops out at a podium around 85 feet, but brings a little bit of a calming effect to the different languages across the street while still speaking to those key elements. And you kind of see this here, and BK's covered, the main features of this facade. So I won't go into those further, just to say that this repeating rhythm of this sort of high bay industrial language, a lot of depth in this facade. We're looking at, 10 or 12 inches of depth between the glass and the brick with a lot of detailing around the facades, a 22-foot bay that then negotiates down to a 33-foot base here. So there's kind of a connection at the major and minor points of this rhythm, resulting in a wider, more horizontal bay expression that's then punctuated by a signature vertical element mid-block, which leads you into the building entry. We can return to this section a little bit further as Rob goes into some detail here. But as Mark mentioned, here's some of the elements along Dot Ave, including the furnishing zone and sidewalk within that 20-foot transportation setback, then allowing for the grade mitigation for resiliency in an extra 11-foot 8 plus some zone and mitigation at the retail face. We're now at Street A and Ellery, and we're looking back, and BK sort of mentioned the features of grounding this major concept of this gantry crane angle, having that be an element that can be viewed at distance, but then also experienced at the street level, but then pulling the podium language back at the edges, but still wrapping it in around A Street with significant setbacks to the tower at the edges. Wrapping around onto Ellery and looking at this section, along Ellery with the street section. Again, we won't walk through for this presentation all of the different elements here, but just wanted to speak to parking along Ellery, but a protected cycle track. What's noted here as a linear park, but is really an active planted zone, which then interfaces with the sidewalk, and then a frontage zone that is controlled and is part of the retailer, but really spills from the sidewalk into this frontage zone, and then that 3 to 4 feet of building undercut, which we will, Linda, show views here. I think one of the things that's worth mentioning as we've kind of developed this is previously we had been showing sort of an all over projecting canopy all along the face of this building. And we really thought that it made sense to bring down the scale rather than having a single unified canopy that doesn't have a specific rhythm to it, and really focus those on individual retails, building entries. This is the cycle room entry here at the corner. Now we're rotating and we're in that East Park, to be renamed East Park here, and we see the composition of the facade elements, and BK's kind of spoken to the overall moves that we're attempting with the facade, but it was also important to us that this felt like, again, an area where we could fully ground this kind of signature gantry move, but then also start to step away with the podium elements that kind of wrap around and turn into and thus open up the building at the edges, drawing the user in. And we're going to go down right now to the grade level and talk about how that's experienced down
Why
at
why don't we
grade.
let Rob take us
Yeah,
through
I
those
can-
last
I'll
few
talk-
slides and
Just briefly about it. So as Louis said, we'll walk around the building. If you want to advance next, Louis. And so we had talked about the primary entrances, lobby entrance, and that grocery retail on the right. And the grade change was a topic, I think, of last conversation. So if you click forward, Louis, we made great strides to, one, eliminate kind of the handrails required on the southern ramp. So we have a less than 5% slope, about an 8-inch grade delta. As you move northerly, at the far north corner, there's a 30-inch grade delta as Dorchester Avenue kind of drops as it moves northerly. And so you can see the number of risers, but really the intention here is to create a variety of, I'll say, episodes along this frontage, some of them lunch type counters, some of them cafe seating and benches at grade. Also activating that 13-foot planted buffer between the cycle track and the sidewalk by having some seating opportunities with the common kind of seating material language along that entire way. And you'll see more views around that main entry to the grocer. Next, Louis, please. We, so quickly, just there's that kind of view, the less than 5% slope up, still working on what that kind of cheek wall / seating element will be there at the corner. Next, Louis. But then you can see as you move down Dorchester Avenue, breaking up that vertical transition with a variety of edges. Sometimes it's seating, sometimes it's counters, and then having a similar seating opportunity on the planted side, we feel like makes Dot Ave really a habitable and kind of enjoyable pedestrian corridor. Next, Louis.
And architecturally, as BK mentioned, previously we had this glass pushed back about 6 feet, and we were questioning whether it made sense to have a circulation zone that happened behind the columns. And really, with the feedback that we heard from the BCDC about connecting that, pulling that forward so that there's still, a very clear edge that denotes the sort of the retail and pedestrian zone, but having that be more connected. And then, working with comments from BPDA staff and others, actually bringing sort of a signage bar, a little projecting element that further pulls down that scale from a 20-foot floor to floor down to essentially a 13-foot glass height. So that's all about, especially with the perspective from grade along this walk, sort of bringing down that scale, which you see at this corner edge here. Take it away, Rob.
Yeah, and I think
I just want to flag for the presentation team that you guys are at time if you want to make these their last comments.
Yeah, I think this is a great way to highlight that kind of, if it will be a grocer, its primary entrance, even though we do need a 1 to 12% slope ramp, we've been able to push that to the south a little bit to really open up that corner. That'll, we assume, to be a very active kind of entry, and we'll need some breathing room. And so what is really, we feel kind of wonderful about this view is the approachability from Dot Ave and from the East Park up into that podium level into the grocer. And then if there is some secondary entrances along the park, aligning those paths within the park so that they align with those retail entries and providing some seating opportunities, right, associated with that.
And very quickly, a grocer doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a front on Dot Ave with registers on Dot Ave and a back that's glazed off on Ellery. There's the potential for registers along this and kind of that high active zone along this edge with a clearly defined entry point that then happens at this corner, because it's really important for a grocer operator to have a clear connection point from inside to the parking, right, and have that clear line of sight. So there's a possibility of having this being a very active zone that's still connected through
I think
these
we have one more
planting.
image of Ellery. Let's hit it.
Yep.
There we go.
Yep. And then you can see the kind of heavily planted character seasonal planting of Ellery on the right side, and then obviously working with BK and his team around retail entries, etc., for those planting and cafe seating zones up against the building.
Okay.
All
Good.
right. Thank you. Commissioners, I think if we could just leave 5 minutes, this is a mental note for me as well, to leave time for public comment, since we're kind of combining these two these two agenda items. So take it away, Commissioner.
Christina, I love that you're keeping us on time. Thank you. So this is really helpful to have these presentations together. And I was really struck, with that image of Ellery that we were looking at, not this one. Yes, And it just helps me to articulate my earlier comment about the open space a little better. When I look at this, I think about this as being a really interesting way that a building hits the public realm. There are these elements that bring, with awnings that bring it down to kind of a human scale. There's a really interesting kind of planting design here, some that comes to the building, some that's kind of on a verge. And this is, I think, what would be also successful to wrap onto the park sides. And when I looked at the park side for East Park, yes, what I'm seeing here is kind of the sheer wall of the building hitting the sidewalk, and then a really beautiful and interesting park space to the interior. But I really want to see more of a street, that sidewalk is treated as a really interesting kind of streetscape. And could we introduce awnings, particularly if there's a side door there? And I love the idea that there could be this seating element that spills out from, say, a Trader Joe's on that Ellery corner on the far side. But could there be something interesting that happens on all the building edges as they touch these two interior kind of pathways, and then front onto the interior green space? I really think that it would take it up a level and help it to feel more human scale all along. And I think, Louis was talking about the fact that you looked at, do you bring the storefronts up to the column? Do you recess them a little bit more? I actually find this really successful. It seems like there's enough of a reveal for interest, but it brings the activity of those shops as close to the sidewalk as possible. And I think with the resiliency kind of challenges and unique design solutions that you're introducing here, I would hate to have the storefront pushed even further back from the activity of the main sidewalk and from the street. And it's really interesting to look at that section that we saw a few slides back through the lens of a potential street widening, right? Where the street widening actually takes you up, if not to the kind of podium plaza level, near it. And so just imagining how that would impact the way that this building then addresses the street. Yes. So that if this all disappears with a widening, then the plaza podium becomes critical for the way that this really feels like it's all part of one continuum, from the street to the verge and the planting zone, and then all the way to the face of the building. So I'm definitely in favor of having that storefront glass kind of pulled up as far as possible, just like you're showing here.
And I will come back to one of your earlier comments just quickly to say, we heard a lot from BPDA and the community about wanting to make sure that the open space, sort of the formal park, east and west, felt very public and weren't encroached upon by sort of the corporate buildings, the offices, the retailers, right? There was a very much ours versus theirs. And what I hear you saying, I think I hear you saying, is no, it should be blurrier than that. It shouldn't be quite the building dropping on the side of, and then you own all of this, right? The Ellery Street is a much more blended conversation. Open space, not as much. So I don't disagree with you. I think we just have to figure out how to be more interesting at the edge of the open space. I like the idea you used the word street there, and almost creating that street instead of thinking of just as a sidewalk. But I want to make sure everybody understands also that all of the open space belongs to the community, right? We're not grabbing part of it or trying to steal it for the corporate users. And that's less of a design thing and more of an intellectual. I want to make sure that we're reflecting the community and the BPDA staff properly without overdoing their thought. And I want you to know that was part of that thinking. So
yeah, that's really helpful, Mark. I mean, I see it kind of as having two related parts. One is breaking down the scale of the building, the way that it hits that sidewalk, and doing it in as successful a way as you're kind of testing on Ellery, for instance. That's one part. And the second component part is thinking about this sidewalk, what we're looking at here in this diagram, as this really interesting transitional public-private corridor. And I like the community thinking about, yeah, we really want this internal park to feel like it's ours. But I think there's this huge missed opportunity here to create this other public-private zone with all of those scale components. So thanks.
Got it. Appreciate the comments.
Yep.
I'm going to apologize in advance. Yes, because that's what's going to happen. I have fire alarm testing going on behind me. So I hope it's not too disturbing. I'll be quick. By the way, I think that conversation you just had very interesting about the blurring of the line between public and private. It seemed, it's very important to us, but to the public, it's all public. And I think it really all wants to feel public. And the distinction is as minimal as possible and as less of a barrier as possible. I hope I'm not stealing Bill's thunder as BK introduced it. And there's an awful lot going on in this building. And I liked what you said, BK, about, I know the other side of the street. I know its scale and sort of the, oh my God, diversity of stuff that's happened over time, and some of it quite discordant end to end. And I wonder if your intentions are absolutely spot on, but there's an awful lot going on in this building. And you had a diagram, maybe you could go to that diagram that just had the blue base and the, I think it was gray massing in the middle. This made more sense to me in that I think I understood much better what you're accomplishing, or what is common among these four buildings. And I like the idea that it's what our colleague Eric Howler always used to ask. You have, when you're doing 4 or 6 buildings like this in context, you have to understand both what do they all have in common that kind of helps them hang together and not fall off into just a lot of disintegrate into a lot of difference, and what makes them different, because you want to create an organic and real place that may have all gotten built very quickly, but has real scale to it because of its diversity. But when you go from this to the building, I feel like that I lose the simplicity of the idea, the directness of that idea, with a lot of parts on a lot of pieces, and there's a strong mass in the center, a strong simple mass in the center, and then there's a series of layers to that. And I'm not saying lose the layers, because I know you're cutting away corners to help reduce the bulk. But then there's even another layer on top of that, which you've referred to as the industrial part, which I think is that corner element, and then the gantry part, which runs up and over. I think there's some very strong things here, and there may be too many of them, and it's leading to I know more diversity than is necessary, and maybe not accomplishing the objective that you stated, which I thought was really right on, in what your overall design instincts, where they were leading you. And there's some very strong parts to this, and I think your diagram is very strong. I actually, until you got to the diagram, I was going to say, I wish you would diagram this for me so I could understand it better. Then you got to the diagram, and I said, I like the diagram. I think there's some real power in the diagram, but I'm not sure you may have deviated too much from its simplicity. And I'll put myself on mute.
Great,
it's going to go off again.
Great comments. And I should say that Michael LeBlanc helped do that diagram. They did that diagram for the for the feeling of the podium, the importance of a strong podium base running the entire length of Dot Avenue, which we had done in the original design guidelines for the project. But yeah, I totally understand what you mean. Bill, you're unmuted and your hand is
Just
raised.
one very quick question. One of you, I somehow missed it. You were talking about the front doors to the supermarket and an easy walk to the parking. Where's the parking?
Parking is underneath 65 and 75 on the other side of Ellery. So the walk to the parking is across Ellery from this corner that you're seeing right here over to
Right.
75 and 65, as opposed to facing Dot Ave. And so we've been trying to balance entry of grocery on Dot Ave, close to the neighborhood, but the ability for shoppers to get across Ellery in the other direction to their car. So it's those two corners.
So they're going to push their shopping carts across Ellery Street? Or are they going underground?
They are not going underground. It is a public ROW Ellery, so no tunnels or anything underneath it. They are pushing their grocery cart, although I can't picture that image, across Ellery Street. Let me say this, Bill, if they drive, right? I'm hoping that it's the neighborhood across Dot Ave, walking with 2 bags every other night, not driving to the parking garage to then go grocery shopping. But yes, you would go across Ellery to get to the parking.
Well, thank you for that information. David, in your South End markets, do people not drive? No, they drive. People drive to the Whole Foods there in
Yeah, they do
Block.
drive. Yeah, they do drive, Bill. Although there's only 100 parking spaces for a 50,000 square foot Whole Foods. Although they will tell you there's not enough parking. But there's a lot of walking too.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of walking.
Yeah, we do have a meeting with our retail consultants tomorrow, and we will bring up some of the concerns raised. Obviously, they were pointing to the Trader Joe's that is on Farnsworth Street in the Fort Point Channel where there is no parking.
Yeah.
They do have some signed street parking there for people to park temporarily to pick up. So what everybody does is they bring their bags out, they wait at the sidewalk, somebody gets the car, they bring it by. That's what they do in that location. But that certainly is a question that we will raise to them.
Bill reminded me of just a minor question that I had about that too. Just noticing that the loading is separated from the retail, kind of this Trader Joe's, by a lobby. And just
Yes
curious.
and no. So there's a reason it's color coded that way. And during the day, when the Andrew Station is open, right, it will be a door like at Time Out Market and some of these other places where you go through and you're essentially passing through the grocery and a part of the grocer to get to the official lobby. And Louis, if you go back to the floor plan, the formal lobby for the office tower is on Ellery. Because, and it's important to note, the orientation of Andrew Station is actually toward Ellery, and then you have to loop back to get to Dot Ave. And when they do that station over, we're assuming there will be a significant number of people that will arrive here by going Ellery and walking to their office building. It's actually a shorter walk than Dot Ave. So that hatched area here at 1 o'clock in the morning gets, right, the lobby on that side gets closed off, and the loading and the delivery to the grocer happens across that space because it's closed to public. And then during operational hours from say 7 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, you can pass through it if you're an office user, but it effectively is leased space to the grocer. And we're working with Boston Urban, and they've got a couple of examples of this and how this can be made a transitional lobby space. So it sort of serves both. But overnight, the loading becomes directly tied to the grocer by virtue of closing off that Dot Ave side of the lobby.
Kind of, I just drew a quick arrow. Do I have that right?
You do.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, the teal loading, it says retail loading, that's specific to the grocer. And so your arrow's exactly right. It's worth noting, just to make sure that you guys know, we're not, but I don't have a grocer signed up. We're working very hard. We actually have a couple of these conversations. If that were not the case, let's say a grocer does not show up, you can see then this becomes a series of retail. That retail loading, the dedicated retail loading on the south edge would go away. There'd be a retail space that's south of the lobby. Then there'd be a series of retail spaces to the north of it on that side. So it is divisible if we didn't get a grocer, it still works. But obviously we're trying to set it up to make it as attractive to a grocer as possible. Louis, can you go to I want to say it was the second image from Dot Ave looking north. I just want to come back to Jonathan's question about sort of what do you see? And your point, Jonathan, is not wrong. You don't read the park as much, right? Because it was a comment from earlier about open space, I want to make sure you see this, right? The flags in this image are the park. And so there is an opportunity there. I think we need to look at how to bring that forward so that when you're coming down the sidewalk, you know, it's not just a gap between two buildings. There's something more substantive as far as the open space.
And then a view such as this, but as we've rotated around, right? And we can see in much more detail. I think we owe that as well.
Yeah, we'll bring that.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful to see. And I appreciate the sort of trickiness around the like leaving space for complete streets, larger kind of streetscape condition that you don't quite know what it could be there. Yeah, this is helpful. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good things going on. I might echo David's point just on there are a lot of things, and I like the intent of the diagram and want to make sure that reads through strongly without getting muddied by the different types of fenestration. I think there are kind of a lot of, as you move past the podium level, I think there's, changes in materiality and changes in plane as well. That again, I'm not trying to say simplify, but I do think kind of creating clearer hierarchy could be helpful as we kind of try to tighten this building up. But I think how it meets the ground here, I think is working well. I mean, probably similar to what we talked about on 495, the other building, to some of the conditions around public realm that's elevated versus sidewalk. I think making it clear that it's all public, to your point, Mark. I think that's, especially when you think about how does change get appreciated in the community, like the idea that everything is for everyone. I think wanting to sort of make that point clear, so that these boundaries, while necessary, do feel like they could be very easily traversed and permeable experientially. So I think that's like that's starting to do that as well right there. So I think just kind of keep pushing on that, I think would be helpful. But I think overall, again, a lot to like, and I think just some of the things around maybe clarifying, streamlining some of the moves above, like even that sort of the angle, which I think is so iconic to what you're trying to do here. My fear is it's starting to get like the scale of that move doesn't register with the same intensity as the sort of texture on the metal panels on some of the other volumes, right? So just wanted to make sure that like the key thing that is the diagram is the most pronounced thing.
Thanks.
Could we go back to 2 slides before this? Okay, stop there. You had it right. Well, we can start here. So let me ask a question first. So you said that there's the potential for this streetscape to go away. Did I have that right? Did I understand that right?
I can jump in. The city requested that 20-foot setback, not to have any vertical transition to the building in case light rail, multimodal, widening of street, who knows, okay. Right? And so,
yep. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. You know, I have no doubt, Rob, that you will make the streetscape great on all of the sides of this. But one of the things that bothers me about all of the views along Dot Ave, and maybe I didn't pay attention to it on the other side on Ellery, but, you know, this is a beautiful building. And the fact that you have to do flood protection has created this zone in here.
Mhm.
And in some ways, I see this as like an extension. I'm not drawing a form, by the way. I see this as an extension to that building.
Mm.
And right now, especially if you're going to lose some space, right, and you're going to, in the future, I don't think that enough care has been taken along this edge to connect it to the building more strongly, so that that starts to feel like some of the platform. It's really jumpy. If you look at the plan below, right, you've got these little teeny tiny pieces of green. You know, you got to do a path. Accessible route in that direction. When you go forward, and I'll erase these drawings. You know, oh, hang on a second. You know, this feels pretty too transparent, and you're not really sure, is this connected to the landscape or is it connected to the building? Well, personally, I think it should feel of the building and be sort of backdrop for the landscape. When you're in the landscape, that's backdrop. When you're in the building or you're passing by it, that's of the building. So go one more. And I think this one is probably in some ways the worst, because you've got this whole edge with this, you know, clang of rails, etc. It doesn't feel very elegant to me. Certainly not as elegant as the building itself.
Yeah.
I also find these to be a little bit hard. I'm not saying they have to go away. I'm saying that the form of them, you know, having that kind of point come out at you feels a little harsh to me. I think that this whole thing could be rethought about how that platform works. Yeah, that's primarily my my comments, certainly on Dot Ave. And then,
Hey, Laura, before we leave, do you know that you see that area
Yeah,
to the
go ahead.
left of the ramp where there is planting that helps make that transition?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
we thought that that was fairly successful in making an inviting thing so that it didn't feel like building necessarily. We were actually asking Jim Fitzgerald and others if we could shift that sidewalk a little bit farther away from the building so we could have a softer area. But what you're saying, I'm just trying to get clarification. You're thinking that it could be
Sure.
a more architectural terrace and less planting, or?
No, I think that the blend is just fine. But if you look at this, I'm going to draw on the plan. So if you look at this diagram, like this ought to feel sharp, like the building, right? And I know I'm going over steps, etc. But, you know, there ought to be this really strong push out from the building. So it's not, you know, I mean, I think these are hard anyway, no matter what happens at that building is, those little tiny spaces. So yeah, that's, you know, check, that's good. But is there also something about the way that bed is encased, I guess, on the building side? Like, is there something contiguous related to the building that needs to happen along that whole edge? And then the landscape can be at the grade of the sidewalk, because that's where it's doing the hardest work. I don't know if you really need to have green on the upper level, as long as that upper level feels like it's, you know, architectural and as strong as the building itself feels in, you know, in design. Was that clear, BK?
Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to study some different options and bring them to you. I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
we wanted on the left-hand side of this image, we really wish that the building, that ramp could bump out and make a wider transition and entrance so that you're pulling
Yeah.
people
yeah,
up to the secondary sidewalk the way they do in New Orleans at a lot of new buildings that have gone up and just raise this terrace on a parcel by parcel basis. But we're somewhat limited, but we'll get back with the BPDA on
Yeah,
where
but,
we have some
you know,
flexibility there.
you sort of wonder though, could you help hide the ramp itself, you know, by just popping up the wall there? And
Yeah.
I mean, there is nothing beautiful about the language of, except, you know, handicap ramps. There just isn't.
Right.
Why so many landscape
point.
architects avoid them.
Sorry, we
Would
can
you
go to
mind
Ellery Street
going-
because I think you asked us.
Yeah, would you mind going to Ellery? Yeah. The only thing I'll say about this, Rob, is be careful about, I mean, this is an illustration, right? And you're trying to show the atmosphere and sort of the experience of this. I would be careful about overpacking with perennials or ephemerals, and get some evergreens in there all around.
Yep.
So that it can still have a presence, and suddenly in the wintertime, the cars feel much more present and active because there's really not a strong enough edge there. Here's one tiny comment I had on the previous slide. So I think, you know, that's like the extent of my comments there. And I do like the way the building in this blends better to Linda's earlier point on the sides. If you could just jump back. Yeah, one more. This is
No.
such a dumb thing, and I'll do it on the plan. But I would, you know, let build benches be shorter, or let them slide past each other so that you have room for a wheelchair to go there, and so that you don't have people staring at each other, you know, across from each other on the benches.
Yep.
So it's sad I have to end on that mealy
No,
comment,
it's okay.
but I will.
It's good. It's good. Yeah, 100% agree. We strive.
We're
to do
gonna-
that, and it didn't
Laura,
happen.
we're gonna let you end on the handicap ramp is ugly, and Rob knows that's coming from me. He and I fought about that thing forever.
I
So
know.
I'm ending on the
Hey,
handicap ramp
let's
is
just,
ugly.
well, we'll raise dot F. We'll do that.
All right.
I like that.
Thank you, commissioners, for that lively discussion. I think at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance that may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand. We've heard 2 agenda items on 475 through 511 Dorchester Ave, also known as Core on the Dot. And I'm just scrolling through the participants here, seeing no hands raised, which helps our timeline a little bit. Forgive me, commissioners, this is my first time running a subcommittee. I realize that we don't have to take a formal vote, but just wanted to note that already the presenters here have noted that they'll be back to a future subcommittee meeting to talk about 65 through 75 Ellery Street. So I don't think that there needs to be any further discussion about what happens next. We look forward to seeing this team again at a future convening of the subcommittee. Is that sufficient sort of for the purposes of advancing the agenda? I'm looking at.
Perfect.
Thank you. All right, wonderful. Then I would like to, at this time, I've been promoting all of the presenters associated with 290 Tremont Street, Parcel P-12C from Chinatown. That's Aaron Hodges, Cesare, Angie, Billy, and Peter.
What a fine team.
Excellent. Thank you to the previous team for your presentation, and 290 team, the floor is yours for a 10 to 15 minute presentation followed by discussion.
Christina. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having us again. I am here also with Cesare from Ground, and Cesare is going to be sharing the screen tonight. Last time when we met, a lot of the discussion was focused on landscape design of this building. However, we do have at the end of the presentation a short section responding to the one request from everybody on the corner of the building, whether we can shape that building back a little bit in this view. So with that, let's go into it. I'm going to do a quick introduction again, just to refresh everyone's memory, and then Chazwe will take over for majority of the presentation. Next. This is a few context views again. We switched one context view out, which is D on the top right corner, just to show you the existing condition, looking back at the building from Washington Street. There's a grove of trees that just beyond the surface parking lot for the Corcoran Genesis Doubletree Hotel. So one thing to call out. And next page, you've seen this, the poem, which the concept of the building is based on. And next page shows the facade translation of the poem using a gradient of colors, wrapping that language around all faces of the building. So with that, Cesare, floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. Let's start with what we heard from last meeting, and thanks for the feedback we received last time from all the commissioners. We were able, working with other consultants that are in the team and with the ownership, we were able to address those concerns and what we think is a big improvement to the landscape design. Looking at the comment one by one, we were looking. You asked us to look at how to reduce the impact of the truck turning movement within the open space at the back of the building, explain the landscape program that are going on in this space, show a direct connection to Washington Street with the understanding that this area is outside of our property, so it's contingent to other agreement that will happen. Clarify the landscape design and how it fits with the overall landscape that Aaron mentioned about the poem. Enhance the character of the internal street and its pedestrian experience, and show you some sun and shade condition for this space. This is the previous plan that you should remember, and there's not much to say about this. I'm gonna show you what we are proposing now. Quick recollection. So starting from Tremont Street here on the left, I'll walk you through the landscape plan. We are proposing an enlargement of both the pedestrian zone and the furnishing zone. And on Tremont Street, we have a pull-off area here on the top left corner, and a crossing walk that is connecting the park on the west side to the corner of the building where the commercial space is located. One difference that with this plan compared to last time, we shifted these 3 trees towards the curb line, and this was done to improve the circulation in this corner, and as well as because we found out there are some utility underneath the sidewalk, so this will help with that as well. Aaron later will also show you some modification that we did to this corner from an architectural perspective. Continuing on the landscape side, the trees and the paving is wrapping around the corner and is continuing along this internal street parallel to the building, carrying this concept of the streetscape inside and inviting and suggesting a public connection that is happening at this corner and is inviting the people inside where the open space is. This pedestrian experience then continues, and it becomes a winding path that is connecting 3 distinct spaces. And hardscape, like a sort of a small plaza in connection to the community room that is here, and then 2 small lawn area at different grades. At the end of this sequence, there is what I was describing before as the connection to Washington Street that is contingent to what will happen outside our property. What I want to mention, something that we didn't really clarify last time, is currently there is a stairs here, set of steps, and a grade change. With our design, we are basically removing these stairs and making this path accessible less than 5%. So basically making this true block connection happen in an accessible way. Now I'm going one by one. I'll address all the comments that we went through before. This is pretty straightforward. This is the curb layout. The blue is what we had previously, and the orange is what we are having now. And you can tell with our traffic engineer, we really reduce the amount of space that is needed by the trucks. And also we strategically located these arms in a way that we could create a contiguous open space, as well as giving more open space to the community room here. In terms of program, so the intention here is this will be a private space intended to be for public use. So we imagine this to be used primarily and activated primarily by the residents of the building, and we imagine a lot of kids playing and running around this space. But we also expect the students and the employees of the Taft Medical Center to use this more quiet open space for lunch. And I say more quiet open space compared to the park that is across the street. So that's the main differentiation, I would say, as well as for the users of the hotel. So starting from the community room, this is really a place where the activities that is happening inside can spill out outside. So we were thinking about flexible seatings for a variety of activities that can happen, from a birthday party to anything else. The upper lawn here is more like because it's connected to this space, we were imagining that this could be used for children play, seating, tai chi, ping pong table here in this pocket here. For the lower lawn, because there are some sitting steps, we were imagining that this could be used as an outdoor classroom, as well as used for small performance, outdoor dancing, and a lunch space. There's something that I did not mention, that we had the idea that this curvy path could also be an art walk. So we could place, and you will see in the views that we could have some art placed on its side, as well as there are other expansion of this walkway to have chess table here and there. This is a view from this is a bird view standing on the parking lot of the DoubleTree Hotel. And we are seeing here the spatial sequence of these three spaces. And we also added a fence on this side with a buffer against the garage and the ramp, as well as what will probably be a berm to mitigate the grade changing that we are doing to go down here. This is a view again from the lower lawn. So you see here, this is the lower lawn with the sitting step. At the back, there is the community room. And here you see the winding walk with some art located on its side, with the chess table where the path is curving. This is another view from the parking lot. And again, of course, these art pieces are just placeholder. And we're also thinking that the lighting for this space could be colorful, same as the paving, and coordinated with the building. This is a view from the community room looking down, and you see in the background, this is the Tufts Medical Center. This view is cropping a little bit this hardscape area that is connected to the community room, but you can see on the left there is a ping pong table with the first lawn, and then you see the path that is suggesting this wandering down towards the corner of the building here. This is another view. I believe this is the last view. Again, you can see, you can appreciate the different segments and the path going through them. And we are trying to set the stage of different programs that can potentially happen in this space simultaneously, so that you can have at the same time some Tai Chi on this lawn and some people individually having lunch on this either lawn, as well as a small gathering at the community space that is here at the corner. And this idea also, and this is a G, so this is a shadow study that is showing the condition June 21st, and in the appendix, if you're curious, we can look at other time of the day and of the year. But as you can see, this whole space will be mainly sunny during the day, with the exception of the lower lawn that will be a little bit more in shade, and hopefully it's not necessarily a bad thing, because in summer some people may look for it. And I will hand over the deck to Aaron, and we can go back later for discussion.
Thanks, Cesare. I think you'll see that the concept really has now, I hope it's apparent that the concept has been carried through the landscape as well. The windy discovery experience that is the mountain pass now is carried out from Tremont as you turn around the corner and continue on as you walk along this path that is activated with pockets of program area, but also interesting things that you discover, such as artwork along the way. So with that, we did some analysis on the visibility of the central open space from Tremont Street. So this is a diagram of us testing what are some of the locations we can cut the building back that will make sense with our unit plan. The arc kind of sweeps around the visibility zone. It's very arbitrary right now. We're just trying to pick a placeholder, and you can see the existing view opening is where it's labeled, blocked by a couple sharp points that's along the hotel building and the residential building. And as you cut the building back, you're not really getting much more direct visual connection. And the gymnastics that you have to go through to bring the same number of units back is quite arduous. So the diagram on the right is showing to maintain the same number of units on the typical floor, which is shown on the top diagram, with the most severe cutback location of a 2-bedroom at that corner. We end up taking away one of the sunniest spots in front of the amenity space in the courtyard. So that's where the 3-bedroom has to locate, right? If you take it away from that corner and put it on the other corner. And the other thing we didn't like very much by making that move is to make those units work along the top right corner. We end up having to put more rooms, including living room and bedroom, that looks at the garage, which I know is a concern both from the community and the BPDA design staff. So with that said, we looked at an alternative approach of opening that corner up a little bit, which is taking a chunk out of it from the ground floor and the second floor. So instead of losing a whole stack of units, we're only turning a corner 2-bedroom into a 1-bedroom on the second floor. And the community commercial space on the ground floor also got pushed back. So this is the existing view of the previous design, not existing. But so in this view, we had columns coming down. The windows are pushed back a little bit, and we didn't have windows on the 2 bottom floors on the further side as well. So if you go to the next page, Cesare, you'll see that we moved the trees out to the street curb on the Tremont side, but we also pushed the glass back. And I think it's giving the commercial space a little bit heavier of a presence along Tremont as a result. And by introducing more glass around the brick corner, I think that's doing some nice things as well. And we also like what it did to the landscape. It's definitely opening up that corner a little bit and inviting people in a nicer way. So we have another view. If you go up next to, the next page shows the previous design with the columns coming down and the glass that's further out. and then the page afterwards is a little bit more inviting. I think it's making it a little bit more apparent as someone crosses Tremont that there is something around the corner over there. So
Erin, can you do a before and after of the first couplet, that first view again?
yeah. So that's the before with the columns and the large canopy, and then this is the after.
Thank you.
Could you flip back and forth on both of those pairs just a little bit? I'm sorry. Yeah, the one before. And got it. Okay. And then the next set. Columns went away.
That's right. Yeah, we're working with our structural engineers now to figure out the exact setback we can push on the ground floor and second floor for the precast slab to not deflect too much, the concrete slab not deflect too much.
Erin, is that the natural end of your presentation? I just want to.
That is
Right at
that
time.
is it. Yeah.
Perfect timing. Okay, commissioners, the floor is yours.
I can start. Oh, go ahead, Linda. Sorry.
Go for it, Jonathan. I'll go after you.
Okay. I appreciate the quick updates and appreciate the thorough test of the sort of feasibility of some of those massing adjustments, those tweaks, and I appreciate the logic and the sort of infeasibility of more larger pushback and how and the sort of sightline analysis that actually wouldn't bear fruit like we thought it might. So again, thanks for the work there. And yeah, I think the sort of even that minor cut of pulling just the second floor in. I mean, I realize that you lose a bedroom, which I acknowledge is a thing that is meaningful, and I hate to impact the overall development summary, but I do think it does make the building lighter, hit the ground a lot lighter at that corner, which I think is helpful given how tight the urban scale here is. So I think that move is certainly helpful. And I'll just kind of start the ball rolling, but I'll defer to the commissioners on the landscape changes. But I think that they are certainly going in the right direction. I appreciate the sort of winding path to kind of connect through the site. I would kind of challenge as you kind of proceed through the project to find ways to really mark that path, so that way you can kind of, if you're on one end of it, you can sort of see where you're going, whether it be the light fixtures or street furniture. Somehow there's creating some, again, moments to sort of mark your movement down that path, I think could be helpful. And also acknowledging that people might not want to take that walk all the time and will likely cut through the lawn. So what does that mean in terms of the kind of desire line and how that actually impacts the use of that space? But again, overall, it's a pretty minor comment, and appreciate the changes, and it's a really exciting project.
Yeah, my comments are similar to the Chamford corner here. Erin, I think, your comment about, yeah, we can pull it back, but it still doesn't open the view up to the park, is really compelling. I think that the cantilever and kind of shifting the glass more to that Chamford corner feels a lot more open and public to me. So I really appreciate that move and agree that doing more than that probably is more detrimental to the form of the building than not. So thank you for testing that. I really like where you came out on it. And then I wanted to talk about landscape. Cesare, can you put up one of the site plans? Great, thank you. So I had two comments here. The first is about the desire line, but in a slightly different way than Jonathan was talking about. I mean, I think that there's so much clarity about coming through this pathway as you've designed it, and I like the tie back to the poem. I think once folks get to that point, and I saw that there's a bit of a grade change in here that you're introducing. But I think once people get to this point, the natural desire line is going to be this. And I wonder if there could be something clever about the paving as it crosses this kind of service alcove, which totally understand you need that for the truck service. That could simply acknowledge the fact that this is how pedestrians are gonna travel. And I think it could be an interesting kind of parallel path. So one thing to think about. And then the second comment that I had about the open space, I really like this idea of 2 lobes. I like the idea of having this seating wall that offers some kind of visual interest. What I find less compelling is the screening. And there was one diagram, Cesare, that you had a perspective that showed us looking through the park and into the parking area, which I know you don't control.
I have the control.
And more at an eye level.
This one.
Looking the other direction. This was a good one. So I find this less compelling because I feel like this is a view we want to screen as much as possible. And so I wonder if there can be more done with kind of the plant materials that help to really create this little parklet as more of a defined space and bring the attention almost inward, while not masking the idea that the path curves around and ultimately brings you to Washington Street, which I think is such a nice and bold idea. So just one suggestion for you all to think about. Thank you.
I do want to thank you for your responsiveness. You addressed the issues head on. I have a question and a comment. My question is, what do you all think the likelihood of convincing your neighbor to be part of this is? And I know that it's probably going to be conjecture, but that link is so very important to making this successful, or as was pointed out last week, this all becomes a dead end, and very, very hard to imagine its usefulness. And then my comment is, when you somehow I think you've done probably as much as you can do, if you can in fact do it, but I'm looking for a signal that it's especially for those people at Tufts, that they are welcome. And I don't know if that signal is a sign or what it is. I know when you go to Seattle and you walk through all those blocks that Amazon controls, and they have all of those mid-block connections, they have a sign that says, at every one of those mid-block connections, they have a sign that this is private property controlled by Amazon. It's very discreet, and you are welcome to use it. Please, I don't know how it says it, but some very, very nicely says, please respect that you are sharing it with your neighbors, or something like that, which probably somebody said you have to say in order to be able to throw people off when they don't respect it. But I'm wondering, what is your, how do you handicap the likelihood of this being implemented?
Should I address that now? This is Peter Munkenbeck. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Peter.
Okay, just quickly to address that. I'm quite optimistic. The abutter has future plans to develop that parking lot as a building that have been announced for years. I still think the comment about the screening is apposite, because we don't know when that's going to happen. So let's screen it now and see how it goes. But with regard to the likelihood that we will come to a successful solution with both the easement boundaries that are required in order to get those truck turns accepted by him, and with regard to transiting pedestrians through the property. We feel quite optimistic about both of those. I just, would reiterate what I said last time, which is that we want to approach it with kid gloves on, and work our way to that solution as a consensus matter, because we think we'll get a lot further that way. With regard to the sign, I think that might be a bit further stretch, because that would be him inviting them onto our property. And that might be a hard thing for him to do. Although at the other end of it, the Tremont end, I can imagine that we can be more welcoming, because we control the building and the property there.
I actually was thinking, Peter, that it could be where the stairs used to be, so it's on your property.
Well, it could be, but it will be hard. The stairs are on his property. By the time you get to, you're pretty far away from
Okay,
Washington.
yeah, no, you are. I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ron, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I just want to compliment you, Aaron, and your teammates, Caesar, Billy, and Peter, for coming up with a pretty nice solution here on both issues, the landscape and the cutting back a little on the Tremont Street edge. I just think you've done a really great job. And yes, I know Peter and others will have continuing negotiations about some of these things, but the scheme right now is pretty exciting, and I want to compliment you.
Thank you, Bill.
So when I look at this, it's the difference between what we saw a couple of weeks ago and now is just night and day on both issues. And I'm suspecting that Cesare, you did not have a day off yesterday, because you have produced so many great views in this relatively small space that could really allow you to kind of see it from everybody's perspective. If you could go to some of those, keep going to the ones that are more at eye level.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that is so nice. Go back. The thing that's so nice about this is the kind of experience you have of going through this threshold of the benches and both of the spaces kind of overlapping. Keep going. Actually, could you go back a second? Because I wanted to ask something that Linda asked. This side, is this higher than this? So that's the high point where I just put that X and it's going down?
It is a little bit lower, but what you are showing is a berm. It's
Got it. Okay, that you are adding. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Keep going. And again, forward. Yeah, for sure. Linda's comment about the screening, I think, more could be done here. There's probably a property line in here that we don't quite understand. So even if it's something like a fence, just something really simple that would get rid of the view. Keep going. The only thing, one more.
I finished. Yeah, that was the last one.
Oh, go back. Okay, go back. There was one that was kind of looking this way. Do you mind trying to find that?
I think it's the first one, this one.
Oh, go one more. I'm sorry, this is torturous, I know. Nope, forward one more from there. One more.
This is the first one, the bird's eye view. Sorry. So
I don't think we're allowed to torture the proponents.
Maybe the thumbnails. Maybe the thumbnails, Laura.
Yeah. This will do it. This will do it. So I'm wondering whether or not there are, and I know you did a really smart thing, which is that you showed that you could take the steps out of this. And I wonder if this kind of gesture couldn't be taken a little bit further. So for instance, you know, I don't know the numbers here, Cesare, you're gonna have to look at them. So would this be a high point so that you could access this, you know, at grade? You know, would this be a high point so that you can access that at grade? I think probably the bet is maybe here a little bit more. But it might be nice to kind of go up and then go back down again. Just to, you know, get away from the planes that are created. And then can you also play with the lawn? You know, it seems like this one's sloping this way. I don't know if this one is. I imagine it is, just because of the adjacent grades, but maybe as you develop it, think about pillowing that a little bit, or, you know, how you might give that some more character. I think Linda's point about this space is really right. And I don't know how you solve that, but I think it's something that you should consider. This feels like kind of because of the paving, it's just the paving pattern. It feels a little pinched. So, you know, I keep wanting someone to be able to walk in this space and have the colors on, you know, kind of frame it on either side. Just let you think about that. But overall, I really think that you're onto something. You know, look at the scale of some of these places. Like, could you make this bigger so you could have more than one chess table, or use it for something else? But you have packed a lot into a very little space, and you have done a remarkable job of responding to all of our concerns in a very short amount of time. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to walking through here.
Perhaps Commissioner Solano gets the last word on both projects tonight. Are there any other commissioners that would like to contribute comment before I open it up to the public? Great. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand. If you're calling by phone, press number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes. And I'm seeing no hands raised. I just do want to be clear that we need to have consensus on what next steps for this project are.
Christina, my feeling is.
Go ahead.
I think we're gonna all say the same thing.
Sorry, Bill. Sorry. Jonathan, my feeling is that this is ready to go back to the full commission.
I agree. I second that.
Excellent. Then 290 team, we'll see you at the next full commission meeting.
Thanks so much.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night. You're being so
project.
responsive.
Good night.
And I believe that concludes our agenda for this meeting. So I'm happy to end this meeting for everyone at 7:07. Thank you so much for your time, commissioners.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, Christina.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Good night, everyone.